Okay, all right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the third episode. I think we're going to do a little rebranding as all things supply chain going forward. So, with that, I'll hand it over to Satya. He has a couple of topics he wanted to passionately talk about, and I'll add my flavor to it.
Hey there, it's great to catch up with you again this weekend. Yeah, today I was thinking to tell our audience what exactly definition of supply chain is. What exactly, like, people keep talking about, hey, this is the supply chain that is happening, supply chain issues and all. But let's understand what supply chain is, right? Uh, when does the supply chain start and all? I think that is what I want to cover, and this is any layman can understand this, right? So see, to me, or not just to me, right? It's just like how basically when does the supply chain start is like, especially when you have a customer, right? Who and the teams that are involved in this whole supply chain system, right? That is what I'm trying to cover. So it all starts with, generally it all starts with when the customer places an order, right? So customer, goes and tell, hey, this is what I need. He goes and places an order. And that's where a demand planning team gets involved in the sense. The demand planning, historically, they might look at the orders, they try to predict future orders, but this is like more like a transactional activity that happens. So you get an order, and then from once the company or which they receive this order, what exactly goes back, in the back end, which all teams are involved, right? So once you get the order, what happens is that then the supply team gets involved. Supply planning team is what I would call it is. So when you get an order, what happens is you need to understand what all things are required for me to make that order, okay, which we call technically as bill of materials or BOM in short. So for example, for me to make a final product X, right? Let's take a hypothetical example of iPhone, right? Now, this is an iPhone. For me to make an iPhone, it might need some 10 different parts, right? So what will happen is, based on BOM, that will convert my requirement from iPhone to its individual components demand. So that's where the procurement team will get involved. So the procurement team will go and talk to the suppliers, and they'll procure this raw materials, right? So this is where the procurement team gets involved. And once you get the raw materials, then what happens is, within the factory, they take the raw materials, and they might have different processes, right? You can have 5 process, 6 process. Let's say for simplicity, we have like 5 process. So those raw materials, they assemble with different materials, and it goes through all these 5 processes. Now you have here, to convert that raw material to finished product, you have this different teams involved, which I would say a quality team that will get involved, because they have to test the quality of the product, whether it meets our customer requirements. That is one thing. Second thing, you have this production control team, which basically looks into all this niche details, such as, whether you have all the machines set up properly, and are we in line to meet our customer demand on time, all those things, right? Which we call it as a production control team. And then there are other teams as well, but this is what high level you have it. And once the raw material gets converted into the finished goods, then they try to package it. That's where the packaging team gets involved. You package it as per the brand, whatever brand you have or whichever the customer you have, because every customer have their own customer's packing. You package it, and then that's where you try to ship it to the customer. Now, and shipping, again, it's a whole different level of topic, because shipping can happen in different stages. You have different entities or different levels, but let's assume you're directly shipping to the customer. So basically, the package can go to a truck, and let's say if it is it within the same city, it goes into a truck, or if it is different cities, different countries, then you can have warehouses. From warehouses, you go to the local distributors, and from there you can it goes to the last mile to the customer, right? This is where the logistics teams gets involved, right? So this is the logistics. So in a nutshell, if I have to talk about, you have this demand planning team in supply. So this whole system which I was talking about, right from the time you get this demand to shipping the goods to the customer, this whole thing is called supply chain system, right? Now in supply chain system, as I told you, right, the teams that are involved is basically your demand planning or order planning team. You have this procurement team involved, you have supply planning team involved, production control team involved, and this quality team involved, and of course, the most important, I would say, as I said, the last stage, which was the logistics team, right? So we have many. So if every company can have different teams, you can have 20, 30 different teams, which has been tasked to perform their own individual metrics, which again is very key. And every metric has its own role, which I'm sure we will cover in the upcoming episodes of ours, where we will talk about each and every vertical, or each and every entity of supply chain, what exactly their roles and responsibilities are, what exactly they have to do. But yeah, in a nutshell, if you say at a very high level, these are the 5, 6 core teams that are involved as part of supply chain system. And it definitely will it varies from company to company based on their complications. You can have different level of teams in different companies depending upon what kind of product they're shipping, right? So these are main areas of supply chain, right? And this is just for anyone's understanding, any layman who wants to understand what exactly is supply chain system. This is what I want to communicate to you. And Uday, you can add a few points from your side if you think
Yeah,
that.
I just want to provide like a basic sort of a simple example which is useful for somebody who doesn't work in the industry or like they're in a different setting, right? Think, see, we talk about supply chain working in it. I would say it's probably a formalizing setup uh, of all the value chain involved in a getting a product to you, whether it's manufacturing, logistics, storage, warehousing, everything. So even if you are like running a small mom and pop, let's say retail store, technically you have a supply chain because you're procuring materials, then you're storing it in your back office, then you're putting in front of your store, like you're trying to forecast how many parts are going to be there, and then you're managing your inventory, right? When you actually take this setting in a larger company, that's when you'll have formally built roles like where we are working here. So that's the simplest way to think about it. You're just bringing a lot more sophistication to it as well. So, uh, in some sense, just as a small divergent topic, I've seen people working in supply chain from different backgrounds. Somebody who's an English teacher has learned things as they come in. People like industrial engineering, folks like us are here. Some person working in mechanical engineering is also here. So you have people coming from all different like types of disciplines who can come here, learn and do work in supply chain. Okay, so that's one thing. And then I just want to talk about skills in general. Okay, when we talk and say supply chain is not a skill. Supply chain is a domain area you learn as you work in the domain area, or you read about it, or like probably you go to like get a degree, things like that. But the core skills which are required to work here are like fairly basic, which are used across other places too. That's why I said even folks coming from other educational disciplines come and work here. Uh, it's not the case, let's say, if you're writing like a VLSI, chip code, or like you're writing some kind of like a C++ coding. It's not like anybody can actually do it. You got to learn the coding itself. That itself is a skill to do it, right? Within supply chain, the skills like communication you got to have, and you got to learn the basic concepts. You need to have basic data analysis skills like using Excel and some of the systems for like planning. We have SAP and few other like planning systems. You should be able to use those things, being able to present the information and probably take a situation and clearly explain and work with other teams. I would say these are the basic skills, and there are certain folks who work in more technical skills. Let's say you are working as a supply chain modeler, where you're trying to build statistical models or optimization models. That's where a degree in industrial engineering or statistics that will come in handy from a skills point of view, like you're having some statistics skills, optimization skills. But rest of the areas, I mean, you can actually learn on the job and make it work. Hopefully that adds a little flavor to the skills on what is needed, because yeah, this is where I think, unlike some of the other like engineering disciplines, I think we said industrial engineering, it sort of falls in a little bit like a fringe field, for lack of better word. It's not very engineering like mechanical engineering or in like electrical engineering. It's more like applied math is what we learn in industrial engineering, and we use portions of it when you're doing some technical work, but other times it's fairly non-technical, a generic business type role.
Yeah, it's what many people call it. It's more like a functional. It's a combination of both functional and technical, right? And
I think
and
when Satya says functional technical, let me just clarify that he's talking about, so it's almost like a given thing since the enterprise resource planning systems you want to call our MRP, manufacturing resource planning system. These are all like software systems which are used to run businesses. And there are softwares in HR, softwares in finance. All this came into existence, I would say, probably around 80s, 90s when the client server architecture, there was a huge probably leap forward in corporations to actually use softwares and actually do things more efficiently. So during that era is where a lot of software systems were implemented. When Satya says technical and functional, he's talking about having little more technical knowledge on managing those systems. And when I said technical, I'm talking technical in the sense of being like data modeling techniques and all that. So anyways, that's where it stands. We'll spend some time to talk about actually career fields and different areas of work you can go into if you started as a supply chain degree or industrial engineering. Maybe in some other episode, which could be useful, you know.
right. So yeah, adding to the also the skills of supply chain when you were talking about, right? The key thing one should be ready with, if you're someone who likes to talk to the people, I think this is something I'm sure, if not in every company or every organization, but this is what I would see personally that you might do this quite often. I'm not sure about other fields or other job sectors as well, but especially in supply chain areas and the supply chain division of any organization, you get this opportunity of talking to many people because ultimately, what happens is this is a combination of different teams within the supply chain that has to come together and deliver for it, right? So that's when you have to integrate, interact with so many cross-functional teams, which I'm sure might be happening in other areas as well. But I believe that as part of supply chain management systems, apart from all the skills that you have mentioned, right? Talking to people and all, and how, and even those skills, people, when I say people manage skills, it doesn't have to be manager, but how do you actually communicate with cross functionalities and all that will be your day-to-day aspect. I mean, that will be your day-to-day work, and how actually uh, you come into that category or how comfortable you are and all will play a very crucial role.
That's a great point. I think having people skills, communication, influencing, presentation, providing clarity will become, I would say, prime importance more than anything else. Other parts you can learn as you go on with
Right.
it. So I think just one more thing, essentially with supply chain itself, any place where there's a physical product, you can assume there's a supply chain. That's the simplest way to put it. Okay.
Most
On it,
likely, yes.
that's pretty much the case. And you would actually start, you would also see the supply chain wording, maybe the exact same way of using may not happen, but being used in some places with a virtual goods as well. Okay, let me give an example. So if you go like a digital advertising industry, so similar concepts like inventory, supply, demand, as- and then managing them will actually come into play even in those settings. But I think how the whole supply chain is managed would be probably quite different. But something, if you are actually looking for those words, jobs, that will also show up. So something to keep in mind. So virtually you can almost imagine most companies would have a supply chain. I'm trying to think what are the sectors maybe where you may not have much of a supply chain. I would say probably in old days like IT industry uh, may not have much of a supply chain unless you're doing supply chain software, or like a financial industry may not have much of a supply chain. Leaving that, like if you're taking any kind of manufacturing, chemicals, pharma, anything, you'll have a supply chain, retail,
I think,
distribution,
yeah,
automobile.
legacy companies, legacy products, and they definitely have supply chains, especially
Finance
the
and
retail.
probably like IT are the only two big, I would say, big sectors where you may not see like supply
Yeah,
chain within them.
like
Pretty much
especially the companies which
insurance
are
would be
dealing,
like all under finance. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the companies, small scale companies which are dealing with software products and all, you might see a lesser footprint from supply chain standpoint of view. Right? They have their own different teams that will be working on this. But yeah, but what I've seen is like, as and when it scales up, as and when things go up, right? I've seen that they start getting into this operations, right? They still have, at the end of the day, they still have to, manage their sales. Like no matter how the product is good, they still
Yeah,
have to
yeah, yeah.
market,
I
they have
think
to
it's
stay,
for sure. Like it's a
right?
matter
So,
of like once you scale,
and
you'll have more
yes,
specific
yes,
supply chain
exactly.
rules. Before that,
And
it would be generic rules. Yeah.
yes, yes. And I've seen the companies which have been scaling up, they started setting up the different divisions. They call supply chain team. They can call it with different names, as you mentioned. It can be called as a supply chain center of excellence. They can give different fancy names.
Right.
But at the end, what you manage is you manage basically the operations of the company, trying to make sure that you are trying to give the best value, best customer service to the customer, making sure that revenue stays intact. And there are different things that an operations team is responsible. Yeah, the key is basically to make sure that their revenue stays intact, whatever we are predicting, whatever we are trying to sell. Because at the end, no matter what, how good a product of yours is, but if you are not able to sell it for whatever XYZ reasons because of, let's say, operations inefficiencies or whatever it is, then it's a business lost opportunity. So that's why this, I feel that this operations team or supply chain teams comes very handy on this. And I think everyone realizes this at this point of time. Everyone realizes this.
Yeah.
I would say, just to quickly, I'd say like two supply chain, let's say there are two companies which are into this legacy products. It can be a food industry or a manufacturing company and all. They have both good, great quality products. And this is something like one of my supply chain did mention to me. They can have a great product, good quality products. They have their own market caps and everything. What separates from these two companies is how good the supply chain team is. What separates this is where it boils down to how basically your efficient, what is the efficiency of these operations. That can pretty much be a big game changer, especially when it comes to acquiring the market cap, right? So, anyways, so that is what we have discussed. But if someone asks me, like, what kind of what is a career path looks like
Yeah.
in supply, when I say career path in supply chain, basically who's basically is qualified to get into the supply chain industry, what kind of degrees you need to have. I know it's kind of these things are a generic field where anyone from as you said, like if you have this ability, if you have this aptitude, if you have this ability to do this data analysis and all those from those backgrounds can get into it. But in a formalized way, like at least what we see today is, right, what kind of people the degree holders get into supply chain, and how does this the career path looks like for someone who's actually trying to seek a career into this industry or into this domain as such. So
Let me take
at
that,
least,
Satya. Let me start.
yeah,
I'll probably talk about this topic a
sure,
little bit. So I
sure.
think if you are going to start your career like with a degree in supply chain or industrial engineering, or as an industrial engineer, you would probably ideally start as an entry level analyst in either it could be inventory planning, it could be demand planning, it could be like scheduling, supply chain planning, one of these areas. And then you would probably, like in US, it's fairly typical for a lot of these traditional companies, as Satya posted, legacy companies have like a rotational program. They would ask you to rotate every 8 months to 10 months in different entry level roles, so you get a lay of the land across the supply chain, and then you end up getting into one function, and then you start sort of learning different areas in that function and slowly grow into different level. And then you would probably rotate across different functions, and then that's how at some point probably you lead one big function like demand planning, supply planning, customer operations, or it could be logistics. And then I want to separate the roles into two buckets. Okay, there could be field roles, and I would say uh, broadly I would put them in three buckets. One is like the field roles, then headquarters roles, and then I would say third set of roles as more like shared services roles, which could be like supply chain modeling, supply chain analytics, or supply chain systems implementation, power user help, like that. And then when you come to headquarters roles, you will see like planning roles like demand planning, supply planning. There could be some customer operations type of roles. Um, and then inventory planning, replenishment, capacity planning. These are the roles. And if you go to the field, typically you would be working in a plant floor, or it could be in a huge distribution center. In a plant floor, you could still be doing like a line lead type of role, boots on the ground operations, or it could be like a plant scheduler who is doing like more finite planning over there, or somebody managing materials planning at the plant itself. That's for the manufacturing. Probably on the distribution side, you could be like a warehouse line person there, or you could be doing a warehouse analyst doing some data analysis, um, or cycle counting. So those are like the kinds of roles I can think of. Uh, and I let Satya add, and then I want to actually zoom out a little bit into slightly different kinds of supply chains and different companies and what could change there. Yeah. Why don't you give your take
Yeah,
on this topic?
yeah, I know that's a good point. Like these days, companies, especially at an entry level, right? Companies are hiring, in the form of rotation program, right? So what they do is they take this new graduate from the colleges, and they actually put in this generally 18 months rotation program. What they do is every 6 months they put in them in particular field. It could be demand planning, as you mentioned, it can be supply planning, inventory management. So they have their core different supply chain entities where they try to place a new graduate into these different fields. And every 6 months they keep rotating out so that they have this understanding of this core entities. So that and so what they do is after 18 months or 2 years, they do have understanding of, let's say, four different functional areas, which could be inventory planning, demand planning, supply planning, or even systems planning, right? So when they have this understanding, then they are given that option, whichever field or whichever entities they are interested in, they can actually continue in that entity. Now, when they actually after this rotation program, whichever field they take, right now they have very good understanding. Their foundation has been laid down. They get this understanding, like where they understand supply chain systems of other fields or functionalities, and it makes them definitely helps them out in their day-to-day decision making, because now they're not going to think about their own individual functionality, but as a whole, in the what basically benefits to the company. That's how they're going to take a collaborative decision. That's how the career in supply chain starts with. This is what has been traditionally in USA, but off late and was not the case in India earlier. But now this concept, the same concept, especially if these are MNCs, the same concepts are being brought into India as well, where they are giving this, where they are hiring new college graduates for rotation programs, because those are the people who are going to become the future leaders of the company. That's how the career spans for them. And as you mentioned, if you keep doing well and go, you can, as I said, you start your career as an analyst. You can go from analyst to senior analyst to staff to manager, a senior manager, and you can climb up the ladder to to the upper management roles, which could be a VP or executive VP roles. That's how I've seen personally as well. People into supply chain, how basically 20 years back they've started as analysts and now they've grown up to VP and SVP levels. And for that, you need to have an open mind to not just interact with people from different sectors or from different functionalities, but also you need to be open to learn new things or new different things, so that at the end you need to understand what benefits to the company is what you have to keep in mind, and that's how you should take that decision. Right? That's what actually I want to add it to what I just mentioned.
I think while you're on the topic, let me just add before we jump to another one on the org structure and how it happens, right? So in a
Mhm.
typical products company where you have physical goods going on, so a senior supply chain, probably the most senior person could be like a VP or SVP sometimes. They would report into a chief operating officer, and then chief operating officer is the one reporting to a chief executive officer. So that's probably the, I would say, the reporting structure, how it plays out in like many companies. That's quite common. It might happen sometimes that a procurement chief procurement officer might directly report into chief operating officer. It might happen in certain companies. Sourcing function could actually separate out completely from like the supply chain side, where the sourcing is mostly managing contracts, and then the strategic relationships, and not so much of the day to day procurement orders and all that is still inside planning, logistics, side of the house. Something to think about. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Satya.
Well, org structure, as I mentioned, yeah. So generally, this is basic skeleton of the org structure. Is like you have a CEO. Under the CEO, you will have this EVPs, which is basically executive vice presidents. And as I said, right, a company, a company will have different teams, different sectors. You have this EVP can be from an IT company, an EVP from operations, an EVP can be from finance. So you'll have this core verticals in any company, right? It is generally IT, procurement, finance, operations. Operations is basically the supply chain basically falls under operations, and then you have HR, legal. So basically, whichever the core functionalities you have, that's where which is what comprises the company. So generally, for every core vertical, you'll have one EVP, and below each EVP, you'll have different SVPs for each and every functionality, like operations being one functionality, functional finance being another functionality, right? So under EVP, you'll have SVPs. Under SVP is basically senior vice president. Under those senior vice president, you'll have this vice presidents, and under vice presidents, you'll have senior directors, and under senior directors, you'll have directors, and below directors, you'll have senior managers, and below them, you'll have managers, and below that, you'll have this either staff people, senior staff people, or senior analysts or analysts, basically the freshers who basically join these companies. That's how basically the framework is, or the hierarchy structure in most of the companies. This is what I've seen, and this is the known terminologies where people can understand. But these days the designations are changing, like especially if you can see in startups and all, you the designation will vary as such, but don't go by designation as such. What you need to understand is basically the kind of work you're doing, the kind of impact you're making and all, and that's how you should relate to it. But yeah, this whole skeleton of hierarchy, this is pretty much how it remains. Yeah, the designation can pretty much change, but you will generally have 6 to 7 levels of layers, right from CO to analyst level. That's how basically a company is stacked up. But yeah, it can vary
One
for.
more thing I want to actually add as we're talking about the org structure is I think it's important to realize after working for 13, 14 years, it comes to light more so as you grow into like senior roles in a company is see supply chain at the end of the day is a cost center. So it's not the revenue line. So the functions like marketing, sales, product management are normally the revenue line. So they are the ones which create the sale for the company, right? And then, I mean, you need to have a supply chain to make the product, but to generate demand to actually sell the product is what generates the revenue, right? Even though you make a product, if you're not able to sell it, it just sits there. So those functions become top line, and supply chain actually normally is in the bottom line. So depending on the phase of the company, whether it's in growth phase or maturity phase, supply chain function will be actually very much tight with respect to budgets, how they behave. It's always around cost savings, and the mindset is that way. I'm trying to tell this because that is also one thing to keep in mind as you're choosing a career in supply chain. What kind of person are you? Are you somebody who wants to play offense? Are you somebody who wants to play defense? Are you energized by actually getting that new sales win? Are you energized by actually saving some dollars and actually getting the things done? That so it depends on the person and who it is. So that's why I'm actually trying to tell that. With that, I want to actually switch over to like another topic real quick is the types of supply chain and the sectors and how it can actually be different. I will probably
Okay.
talk about couple of supply chains or probably more than that, and Satya can talk his experience. Let's start with something like a retail supply chain, right? So what retail could be is like Walmart. Let's take one of the biggest retailer in the world, like a brick and mortar retailer. Walmart started as one store supply chain, right? So they used to have vendors, and the vendors sent the products through trucks to that, you know, store, and from the back of the store they stocked it in the front of the shelves, and people came in and bought. As the company grew, they have like distribution centers, then they have regional distribution centers. They get products from different vendors. There is sorting, storing, pick, pack, shipping happening at these warehouses, and then they are shipped to the stores, and then that's how it's happening, right? So it's like one kind of supply chain. And then let's take something like a process manufacturing type supply chain. That could be chemicals, that could be food manufacturing. To some level, it could also be like pharma drugs as well. So where you get a bunch of ingredients, you do a process. It could be heating, cooling, oven, mixing on like a plant line through various processes, then packaging it, and then you ship it to your warehouse, store it in the warehouse, and then it goes from there to the end customer. Like it could be consumer directly, or it could be a B2B setting. So it's like a second type of supply chain you can think of. Okay. And the third one I haven't worked in, I cannot really talk very closely, but this could be like an automobile kind of supply chain, right? So where there are like thousands of parts coming from different vendors, they're coming to your automobile line, you're bringing them there and you're assembling them to make a car. And then there comes the car, it's shipped out. So this is completely assembly. There's not much of processing happening here. So it's a different type of setting versus like process manufacturing. I would call this like discrete manufacturing in some sense. Uh, so yeah, I think with that, Satya, I'll turn it over to you. If you have any kinds of supply chains you have seen, like you're mostly in semiconductor, so which is a completely different animal, you can throw some light on that.
No, yeah, I think you broadly covered a different type of supply chain. Yeah, I agree. What I can talk about specific to this semiconductor is actually it is, I won't say it is same as of the way automobile works, but here it's basically combination of two. Basically, it's combination of assembly, where again here also we have to wait for different parts to arrive and where we assemble and make it. But broadly for automobile, right? It's again a tech industry, right? You once the technology is decided and all, and the technology keeps changing every 5 months or 6 months, right? It's more technology driven things, and that's what dictates the manufacturing flow of semiconductor based companies. But in a nutshell, supply chain again, right? Once we know what is the technology that we are going to make it up, it's again I would say kind of blows down to the assembly level, where you just and in semiconductor after like as we mentioned in
Can
our
you talk a little
first.
bit about the front end and back end? You talked
Yeah, I
about
was
one
coming. I
time.
was
Yeah,
coming to
yeah.
that. Like in episode 1, also we spoke about in semiconductor. Basically, you have this broadly two divisions: front end and back end. Actually, so front end is basically what we call it as fabs, right? This is where you basically make wafers. Now, wafer is not like a chip wafer or something like that, but wafer is basically like, if you see, it's more like we get the silicon wafers, ingots, which we actually cut into small pieces. It's more like a circular plate. Probably in the future videos, we can show how basically wafer looks like. It's basically more like a circular plate, which is basically made from silicon. Okay. And this is what fabs do actually. Now, there are a whole lot of process that happens, which is very where with this high-end technologies involved, and this is why all these big countries like US are scrambling for. So they basically in fab, what happens is they make wafers, okay, and this wafer, when you see, right, in wafers you have this latest technology that is and the latest technology. So they have this different processes where you have this masking, layering happens, and once, and when I say masking, it's basically the whatever the technology they are going with, that's what they will imprint on the wafer, right? Which basically will have different circuits. It's a bit technical, but if I have to basically summarize it, that wafer will have latest technology on it, and that wafer, it goes to the backend. Now let's come to the backend part, where basically this wafer gets converted into small chips. Okay, so this is where from process point of view, what happens is you have these three processes where assembly, testing, and finishing of that wafer happens. So basically those wafers are sliced and cut into small chips. Okay, then the assembly happens. If they have to basically add more components onto that chip, and they have to, if it is a multi-stack or if it's a higher capacity chip, they can add more, more than one chips to it. That's what happens in assembly. Then it goes for testing, because you have to test that chip whether it is meeting the customer requirements, whatever stringent requirements the quality control team has established. So it has to meet that requirement, and then it goes for finishing, where the packaging and encapsulation and all those things happen. So in semiconductor, as I said, right, again, in the back end, I would say it's more like an assembly driven process that happens. But yeah, it's a combination. But yeah, it's, as I said, right, unlike automobile, the technology changes very frequently, every 5 months, 6 months, and that pretty much happens. Of course, in the fab world, where they keep, they have to come up with they might have to come up with different machines or a different technology or whatever it is. But more or less, it keeps changing. But yeah, high level, it still comes as part of the assembly. It does falls under this assembly level itself, because they are also still, you are waiting for different materials to come and where you assemble it and make that chip out actually before it gets shipped to the customer.
Interesting.
But
Yeah, so I think that's probably a very interesting and nuance between different kinds of supply chains, as you are talking about here, because that dynamic doesn't exist as much if you look at it in a process manufacturing setting, like at least in food space, I can speak for, the products really live for long, long time. So let's say you're making like cornflakes, right? Cornflakes has been in existence for 50, 60 years. Maybe there are a few things here and there that have changed, but the basic structure of the cornflakes, the formula is exactly the same. That's what actually makes, so think we mentioned that last time too. The product looks very unsophisticated, but it looks supremely profitable for the company. And then that's the value add, right? So if you think about like a food product, I think we're running out of time here real quick. The value add in a food product is a consistency the consumer can get day in, day out. Same thing in a semiconductor chip is getting the maximum efficiency. So it has to get better, then you get more efficiency. So it's a function of the product which dictates how it comes into play. But I think any
it's
closing thought? Yeah,
more than the product in semiconductor, more than the product is the shelf life of the technology.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that disruptions happens very frequently. Like say
Yeah,
the competitor comes up with some other better product at a cheaper price or with different technology. That's where the shelf life here is not the product, it's a technology, right? And that's where it keeps changing very frequently. And that's where I would say this it's a bit more volatile. Like if you're not working on new technologies parallelly, then it becomes very difficult
yeah.
for you to come up with better margins.